Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back. And today I want to talk about a show that's an exclusive on Shudder. We're going to talk about Creepshow today. Now, for those who don't have Shudder, I'm sure there's another way that you could probably watch this show. It is a Shudder original though, and if there is any other reason to watch the show than to just get Shudder, I would say it's just that Shudder is a really cheap alternative if you're really into horror movies. It's only $6 a month. I paid $60 and I got the year, so I saved 2 months. You know what I mean? So it's really cheap and it's a really good station for the avid horror movie fanatic. It's got a huge selection. It's got a lot of its own original content, and Creepshow is one of them. Now, what Creepshow is, for those who don't know, it's a series based on stories written by Stephen King. And they were written to they were his version of, not combating, but like paying homage to horror comics from the 50s. And the original portrayal of these were in movies. There were three movies that came out, I want to say, throughout the 80s. There was the first one, which to me is the best one. Like maybe the second one, maybe the first and second one are the best ones. Actually, wait, the third one didn't come out in the 80s. The third one's more recent. Yeah, the first two were 80s. That's why I love the first two, and that's probably why I didn't see the third one. I don't think I've ever seen the third one, but the original film was a trilogy, and there's a huge gap between the third one and the first two. Now, the first two are great, especially the first one. The first one has some of the funniest stories and creepy stories and just unique stories. It's stuff that isn't enough to make a full-fledged film, but it's enough to make a movie with five of these stories. One of my favorites being the creature in the box under the stairs, and the guy feeds his wife to it because his wife is a nagging bitch, and the janitor gets eaten by him, and he's just like, "Oh, this creature is just killing everybody. What do I do?" And it's a really, really fun movie, and I'm definitely butchering the explanation of it. But it's old enough where if you're a Stephen King fan, you've watched it. If you're a horror movie fan, you've watched it. Even if you're a George A. Romero fan, he's the director of the film. I'm not sure about the second one, but he's definitely the director of the first one. So even if you're a fan of his, you've watched that film, at least the first one, regardless if you haven't seen the first two, or all three of them, or any of them. They're great films, especially if you like anthology films, and they're a lot of fun to watch. At least the first two. I can't really vouch for the third one, I should say. So what Shudder did was they created um, I would say a revamped version. I don't think they repeat any stories to my recollection. I think they're all new versions of different stories or newer stories. So they came out with this a year ago, and it's a Creepshow original. It's in episodes. I believe it's 6 episodes in the first season, and I believe there's 2 seasons because I believe I watched at least 10 episodes. There's at least 10 episodes, and each episode is an hour long, and it's each one is two separate stories. Could be under an hour depending on the story, but I think one or two of them have three stories each because they couldn't make them longer to fill in the time. But the stories are really, really cool, and they're very unique. And of course, the time frame that they're given for a show like this is perfect because they're not worth longer. There's certain stories you can't pull and stretch and make an hour and a half, 2 hour movie, and you don't want to do that because then it's going to lose its value. You want stories like this to be quick. And one of my favorite types of stories is short stories. I believe it's harder to write short stories than it is to write novellas or novels or series because if you wanted to write a trilogy, that's 3 books that you have to tell this story with. And maybe you write so much you make a fourth book by accident. When you're trying to write a short story, or when the goal is to write short stories, you have a limit. A short story, I believe the max is like 1,000 words or something. And you'd be surprised how far you'll get, and you'll realize that you're not at the end of the story yet, and you've already peaked your 1,000 word mark. So you have to cut back a little. And I know that maybe some people don't intentionally write short stories, but there are things that there are writing contests, and there are people who write blogs that are short stories, or even just writing short stories for, say, podcasts or channels. I have a podcast myself outside of this one. It's called Pages. It's where I write my short stories, and it's just ideas that I have that I can't make into full-fledged books. So short stories is a definite niche in the storytelling genre that allows for not just a little more leniency and knowing that whether or not you feel a story can make a full-fledged book or film or series or trilogy or anything like that, but it gives you enough to say that I can at least make this story something and put it out there. And that's what Creepshow gives to you. And it's also anthology. It really gives you that anthology feel because you're not following anything that's connected. None of these stories are connected in any way. And I love anthology films. I've always loved Tales from the Crypt. I loved Creepshow. Even the original Tales from the Crypt, which has nothing to do with the Crypt Keeper, who was premiered in like the late 80s, early 90s. There's an original movie, Tales from the Crypt, from the early 80s, maybe even mid 70s, that's just about five random people who meet like a monk in like a ritualistic cave, and they tell their stories in an anthology base. And I think that's what led into the Tales from the Crypt that we all know and love. But there is an original movie that takes place in that fashion. And Tales from the Dark Side, another great anthology type film. VHS is an anthology type movie. These are just these are great for simplistic stories and quick stories and and good fun stories. There's an episode that's about this kid. He's a college student. He comes home from some trip or whatever, and he picks up the wrong luggage or the right luggage. Just he thinks it's the right luggage and it's not really the right luggage or whatever. And it turns out that there's a guy in there, like all contorted up, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm stuck in here. Can you help me get out?" And he's like, "Dude, like, how are you alive? Like, your foot is by your head and all this stuff." And as he starts to pull him out, the guy's like, "Oh yeah, when I'm in pain, this thing happens, and I produce gold." And he's like, "You what?" And then he tries to pull him out, and then gold just starts flying out of his mouth. And then his roommate finds out, and then his girlfriend finds out, and they want to use they want to use the guy to make money so they can not be poor students anymore. And of course, it backfires on them, and they wind up killing the dude who's the original owner of the case and whatnot. And it's one of the better stories of the anthology, and there are a lot of good stories in this show. I don't think there's any reproductions. So it just also is a tale to, say, just Stephen King for being able to write all these different stories. I'm pretty sure if you watched all three of those movies and both seasons of this show, not one story is reproduced. Not one story is redone. And each movie has four or five stories. So the films have 15 stories. There's two seasons of this, 10 to 12 episodes, each one two to three stories apiece. You're talking close to 40 stories. That's a lot to write about. And that's just the kind of writer that Stephen King is. And he's had a ton of these. He has a thing on one of his websites, they're called Dollar Babies, where he has this idea. He doesn't want to do anything for it. He sells the idea to film students for $1. Here's the rights to this idea. It's yours. Give me $1. That's how Stephen King works. So you know that if he's able to run something like that, he has more than enough ideas to put out there to keep a show like this running for a long time. And I think Shudder is the best channel for it because it's just a nice reinvigoration of those stories. Again, let me do a quick lookup. I know the first two are from the 80s. Yes, the first one is 1982. The second one is 1987. The third one is 2006. Huge gap in time. I don't know if George Romero did the second one or not. I know for a fact he did the first one. I don't know why they eventually came out with a third one so many years after the fact. That to me is a bit weird. The second one is not directed by George Romero, but it is still written by Stephen King because, these are his stories. I believe he actually eventually turned them into an actual comic book. I mean, they were just meant to be kind of a, again, paying homage to those types of stories, those comics. I don't believe he actually had a comic book released. He might have. If he did, those would be probably cool to read. And again, you're talking about comics that became movies. This was a thing way before, Disney brought Marvel and then we have those movies. This is original. Some of the big comics back in the 40s and the 50s, it wasn't just, superheroes. It was also things like Archie Bunker and Richie Rich and horror comics. One of my wife's favorite horror comics that she's a huge collector of is The Witching Hour. That's a huge comic series. But the horror genre in comics have died out, and so have like even the comedic comics, the things that you would consider like I said, Richie Rich or Archie Bunker or anything like that. Those have kind of faded out of existence. Now it's all about Marvel and DC and Dark Horse, Spawn, Iron Man, Spider Man, Batman, Superman. Those are the prime guys. But Creepshow really gave a shining light to what the horror comic was. And this show is super good. It's super fun. It's really, really a fantastic little Shutter original. And I'm not going to say that there is any other way for you to watch it outside of Shutter. I would say go and watch it with Shutter. But if you can find a way to watch it, however you choose to watch them, I would suggest watching them. Especially if you're somebody who's my age and you knew the first film or at least the first two films. I might have even just brought to your attention that there was a third film. You probably didn't even know about it. I didn't know about it until I did this. So go back, watch those movies, watch this show, get some good stories in there, get some good creepy stories in there, get some good Stephen King short stories in there for you. I think they're fun, and I enjoyed watching them, and I'll probably watch them again. All right. Thanks, guys.